Hi class, it's Dr. Lindner. In this brief video, we're going to introduce tissues and talk about how tissues are created. So in terms of types of tissues, what are tissues? Tissues is when we have a group of cells that usually have a common embryonic origin in the embryo, and they function in harmony together to carry out a specific job. And there's four basic types of tissues in the human body, and they're categorized by their structure and function. The four basic types of tissues are epithelial. Let's go back. The four basic types are epithelial, connective, muscular, and neural tissue. Of the four, these two are labor intensive to study and work on. So we want to get a jump start at these two. Muscle and neural are pretty straightforward and pretty easy. And one of the key things that differentiate epithelial from connective tissue, when we look under a microscope and we contrast these two, you'll see that epithelial tissue has a bunch of cells that are closely packed to one another. When you have cells that are closely packed together with very little extracellular matrix, that's epithelial tissue. When we see a bunch of cells that are scattered throughout, that are not closely bound together, like we see in epithelial, but we see cells all over the place that are far apart from one another, in which case we have lots of extracellular matrix, which means the stuff between the cells, extracellular, outside the cell, extracellular matrix, that's connective tissue. Okay, muscular tissue and neural tissue, pretty straightforward. The reason why these are more labor intensive is we have to talk about how we name epithelial tissue. Are we naming it simple cuboidal or stratified cuboidal? Simple columnar, stratified columnar. Simple squamous, stratified squamous. Transitional, pseudostratified. There's lots of different categories, but there's lots of categories on the connective tissue as well. Is it dense connective tissue? Is it loose connective tissue? Is it structural connective tissue? Is it liquid connective tissue? Is it connective tissue proper? So we've got lots of categories that we have to understand here. Under muscle tissue, muscle only comes in three flavors, right? It's skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. And under neural tissue, we'll talk about the two types of cells, the neuron and neuroglial cells, and the different parts of the neuron. But before we get into the tissues, we have to say, we know they're made of cells. Well, how do the cells join to make tissues? Well, cells come together by way of cell junctions. Cell junctions are what ties cells together. It brings them together in a number of ways. It's the point of contact between the cells. Those are called cell junctions. And we have different types of junctions. And I want you to focus on a few of these that I think are really important. One of them is called tight junctions. Tight junctions are extremely important. They hold cells together tightly, not loosely, but tightly. It creates a watertight cell between cells. It's preventing the passageway of water and solutes. We commonly find this throughout the gastrointestinal tract, throughout your digestive tract, and we find it throughout the urinary bladder. And the reason being that we have it in those places, especially in, let's say, the colon, which is your large intestine where you have a bowel, and the urinary bladder, we don't want wastes. We don't want acids. We don't want enzymes. And we don't want waste leaking into other tissues and leaking into the blood, because you can get some serious bacterial blood infections called septicemia. So I'll give you a real practical example of how tight junctions are related to our lives, to health, and to autoimmune diseases, like rheumatoid arthritis as a classical example of this. So let's say here's part of the intestine. Here's part of the intestine. And we know that in the intestines, we're going to have proteins in there. We're going to have foods. We're going to have fats. And we also know that within the intestines, we're going to have these columnar cells that have those microvilli on them. And we know that the microvilli are there because these proteins have to be broken down by digestive enzymes to be absorbed by those microvilli to only be pulled in to and connect to the blood vessels. So you're absorbing nutrients. We want to get it into the venous system, into the veins, so that it can bring it into the liver, purify it, and bring the nutrition to different parts of the body. Now, these columnar cells are held together by tight junctions. But what happens when we consume fried foods, alcohol, antibiotics, high sugar, medications? When we consume medications, fried foods, alcohol, antibiotics, high sugar, what that does to the tight junctions is they weaken them, they damage them. So instead of them being very close together, what ends up happening is now we get junctions like this that are spaced apart. They're not held together. So instead of this is healthy tight junctions. This one over here, these are damaged tight junctions from all of these things up here. When that happens, these proteins that are supposed to be digested by and broken down by digestive enzymes, right? These large proteins are supposed to be broken down by digestive enzymes so that they can enter the microvilli to be absorbed. Now, if you have a bad microbiome, bad bacteria in the gut, if you have taking medications, too many fried foods, alcohol ingestion, antibiotics, and sugar overload, it damages the tight junctions. So then what happens is, let me get my eraser on, and let me bring this back in here now. So now, here, it's good, but here, it becomes permeable. So now these things can slip through much larger than what they're supposed to. So now you have these large proteins entering because the digestive enzymes didn't work on them and they didn't get digested properly like they were supposed to. So you have these large proteins slipping through. And what does the body do when there are foreign proteins within the body? What the body does is it wants to attack it. It wants to attack it. So the body makes antibodies to attack it. Basically, your immune system is upregulated, is working overtime because these proteins the body can't recognize. It only recognizes when they're broken down into these small amino acids. When they're large proteins, larger than when they should, the immune system attacks it. And sometimes it looks at the frequency or the vibration of that protein, and that vibrational frequency of that protein can resemble the protein in your joints, like your cartilage, or it can resemble the same protein that is on the receptors of your thyroid gland. Now, wherever those proteins are, if your immune system is attacking this protein and anything that resembles it, it's going to attack your joints, rheumatoid arthritis. It can attack your thyroid gland. Maybe it has the same vibration of those receptors or the protein built within that gland. So this is what we call leaky gut syndrome, or it's called intestinal permeability. Intestinal permeability and leaky gut syndrome are the same thing. What it is a practical understanding of what happens when the tight junctions are damaged and weak by lifestyle and poor choices. Okay, so we need to have healthy, tight junctions. Adherens junctions is another type of junction that holds together epithelial cells. And it's just another structural component that that are found within the cell and the cell membrane. An integral membrane protein connects to other membranes of other cells. So we'll see adherens junctions associated with those integral membrane proteins that are going into the cell membrane wall that connect to other membranes of other cells. But they're not super tight like the tight junctions. Desmosomes are other type of junctions. They're designed to resist cellular separation or cellular disruption. They're designed to handle twisting and compression. So when I think of this, I think of a person going to a massage therapist where they're manipulating the skin and they're twisting and compressing, and the skin doesn't bleed and it doesn't get all ripped apart unless there's a soft tissue, a connective tissue disorder, of course. But in healthy individuals, these desmosomes are strong and they're found in the superficial layer of the skin. And they are pretty strong, and it helps to explain that when a person's skin is damaged, like in a really bad sunburn, what ends up happening is the skin can peel. You can actually rip those sheets off when they become damaged. These are hemidesmosomes. They're not desmosomes. They're just hemidesmosomes, which are half, right? It's different than desmosomes that go all the way through. Hemidesmosomes are just half. Gap junctions, very important. So far of all of these, desmosomes are important, tight junctions are important, and gap junctions, these are used whenever we're talking about fast, rapid forms of communication that's being needed between cells. When we need rapid, fast forms of cellular communication, gap junctions are utilized. We're going to see these gap junctions in the heart when we talk about cardiac muscle. Gap junctions is what holds one heart cell to another heart cell to another heart cell. And heart cells need to communicate super rapidly with one another so that both atrium and both ventricles are contracting in harmony at the exact same time. Atriums contract and then the ventricles, then atriums and ventricles. It's due to these gap junctions in how all cells communicate so that they know when they're contracting in harmony at the same time. And the heart contraction at the same time is what we call a functional syncytium or a functional synctium, because they're functioning in sync, in harmony. And also the smooth muscle of the GI tract is made up of gap junctions as well. Good place to take a break. And when we come back, we'll contrast and compare epithelial to connective tissue.